In today's story, we follow two sisters whose lives are torn apart by fire, loss, and betrayal. From the ashes of their childhood home, they are cast into the world of thieves. One growing hardened and loyal to a family of criminals. The other longing for freedom and peace. But in Shacor, no past can stay buried forever. And when blood debts return, the price may be more than either sister can bear. Welcome to Krane Originals, home of original fantasy tales set in Shacor, a world of mystery, heartbreak, and triumph, touched by just the right amount of magic. If you crave new original stories every week and enjoy what you see, then don't forget to hit that like and subscribe and come join the adventure. Now, let the tale begin. This is the story of the Sisters of Shacor. In the year 1690 of the Second Era, Shacor was a nation known for many things, from its harsh lands to its even harsher economic states. Yet, despite these things, the country was also known as the center of cultural revolution. Its cities were so often littered with great painters, musicians, and playwrights whose works would go unknown, for they were a dime a dozen in the lands of Shacor. But this is not the story of a painter or musicians, not artists, but of thieves. This is the tale of two sisters who do whatever they must to survive after the world takes everything from them. This is the story of the shopkeeper and her sister. Charlotte and Sophia Leclerc were born into a wealthy fur trader family. Although they did not come from nobility or a long lineage, they were well off, and most importantly, loved. Charlotte, the older of the two, was the pride of her mother's life. They enjoyed sightseeing together, admiring the great works of art around the city, and often gave spare coins to the poor on the streets of Rosenbund, the capital of Shacor. On the other hand, Sophia was the little troublemaker, always getting into mischief. She frequently would sneak into her father's office or take too many sugary snacks from the kitchen before dinner. Regardless of her antics, Sophia could do no wrong in her father's eyes. She only brought joy and laughter to the old man. She truly was a daddy's little girl. But the good times would not last. The sisters were unaware that their father had made many enemies and owed a significant amount of money to dangerous individuals. People you never want to owe money to. The kind of people that would get what they were owed one way or another. And to say that the debt he owed was substantial would be an understatement. So despite everything appearing almost perfect on the surface, the girls had no idea what was waiting for them in the shadows. It was a cool Shacoran winter's night when Charlotte awoke, coughing as smoke and heat began to fill her room. At first, she was confused, but it only took a moment for her to realize what was happening. Her room, her home, was on fire. In a panic, she cried out for her father, screaming for her mother. At just 9 years old, Charlotte curled into a ball, coughing and crying, frozen in fear. She didn't know what to do. What was happening? Or why it was happening? As time passed and no one came, and the smoke grew thicker, the little girl began to fade, struggling to breathe. If not for the cries of her little sister, she might have just drifted away into the night, allowing the fire to consume her. But when she heard her sister's desperate call for help, Charlotte realized that like with her, no one was coming to save them. It had to be her. Charlotte had to be the one to save her little sister from the flames. Charlotte, being as brave as she needed to be, ran to her door. Coughing and now heaving, she grabbed the handle and instantly regretted it as she seared her hand. The little girl screamed in pain and fell back, her skin feeling as if it was boiling. Once again, she cried for her mother, father, anyone. But still, all she could hear was her little sister's desperate screams, which were growing softer and weaker by the moment. Determined, Charlotte picked herself up and looked around before grabbing her sheets and wrapping them around her hands, hoping to protect herself enough to turn the handle and open the door to get her sister. However, despite her efforts, she just wasn't strong enough. The heat from the flames had expanded the door, and with a burned hand, she struggled to push past the pain. Defeated, Charlotte summoned what little strength she had left to scream once more. But this time, instead of calling for her parents, she shouted for Sophia, her little sister, telling her it was going to be okay, that she was coming for her. In that moment, Charlotte was merely trying to comfort Sophia in what she believed might be their final moments together. Just as Charlotte was about to fade away, her door burst open, and a wave of heat, accompanied by what felt like flames, swept in. Standing before her was a large man, one she barely recognized. He was one of her father's men, who always helped load the crates of fur in the morning. However, she could hardly recognize him now, as he was horribly injured. Blood poured down his face, and his left eye appeared to be severely damaged, if not worse. Limping over to Charlotte, the man was so big that it took her a moment to realize that her little sister, Sophia, was wrapped in his left arm. Grateful but terrified, Charlotte reached out for her sister, but the man slapped her hands away. With no time to waste, he wrapped his arm around Charlotte and scooped her up, carrying her like a sack of potatoes. With urgency, the wounded man moved the girls out of their burning home. However, as he finally got them free and stepped outside, he succumbed to his injuries and collapsed just beyond the front door, nearly crushing the little girls he had risked and endured everything to save. Charlotte felt herself fall rapidly and harshly to the ground. She struggled to crawl away from the man who had just saved her. Standing up, she looked on in horror, her eyes wide as she watched her home, her life, burn away before her. If it wasn't for her sister's coughs that broke her from this terrible trance, she would probably just have stood there watching in awe of the fire. But knowing they were not safe, Charlotte looked down, falling to all fours, crawling weakly to her sister. Like a puppy curled in her sheets, Sophia remained under the man's arms. Charlotte knew they had to escape from the flames, so she began to push the man, pleading for him to stand up. But it was no use. Within seconds, she realized he was dead. With no time to mourn, Charlotte grabbed her little sister, shaking her free from their savior's grasp, and dragging her as quickly as her small arms would allow her. Struggling the entire way, sore and with her lungs feeling as if they were on fire, the little girl pulled her little sister to safety. What transpired after that felt like a nightmare. Everything the girls had once loved and cherished was lost in a single night. Their home, their wealth, and their parents. They were left alone in a nation that had little sympathy for those who had nothing to offer. The sisters quickly found themselves like street rats, wandering aimlessly with only each other for company, begging for food, shelter, or just a shred of kindness. The only upside to the hunger was that the pain numbed the heartbreak that they would have felt for their parents. However, as the days passed, their stomachs ached, and their lips became so dry that it hurt to breathe. Charlotte began to wonder if it would have been better if they hadn't escaped the fire at all. If they would have been better off perishing alongside with their parents. Just when everything seemed hopeless, a boy by the name of Theo noticed the girls one day. Charlotte and Sophia were curled up in an alleyway, starving and desperate for water. Theo, a young man around the age of 14, took pity on them. He offered them food and drink and asked where they had come from. Sophia, who hadn't spoken since the day of the fire, remained silent, but Charlotte was immensely grateful. She expressed her thanks to Theo, praising his kindness, and told him everything that had happened to lead the girls to the current predicament. Theo listened with a mix of amusement and sympathy. He had told the girls that he could help them learn how to take care of themselves and how to navigate the streets. In return, all he asked was a cut of their earnings for the crew. He spoke in a way that made it seem like he was inviting them to join him in a game. However, the sisters understood that they had little choice, and Theo was the first person to show them any kindness. Reluctantly, but with no real options available other than to sit around waiting to die, the girls decided to go with him. Theo led them to the den of thieves, which he called the headquarters for all the greatest pickpockets and grifters the streets of Shacor had ever seen. In reality, the girls quickly realized it was nothing more than a few ragged shacks in the woods, surrounded by shady figures. As Theo showed them around, Charlotte couldn't shake the feeling that while everyone ignored them, they also seemed to stare right at them without ever making true eye contact. It was an odd and unsettling sensation. Eventually, Theo introduced the girls to his boss, a scrawny little man who had lost most of his hair and appeared to be missing a few fingers on his left hand. His eyes were shifty and seemed annoyed at the presence of the two sisters. "Who are these, Theo?" the man asked, his tone carrying a subtle hint of dismay. But the boy just smiled, assuring the girls that the man was cool and informing the boss that they were his new recruits. The shady man stroked his chin and raised his brow as he circled around the girls, his eyes wandering over every inch of them. Sophia was terrified, gripping her sister's arm as the man drew closer, like a predator closing in on its prey. He grabbed Sophia's face, his cold, bony hands strong as he squeezed. "A little young, aren't you?" he remarked. Charlotte's heart sank. She feared that she had led her little sister to death's door. She screamed at the man to let her go, and he did, but only to seize Charlotte's face next. The man's grip was firm, forcing her mouth open, and it felt as though his bony fingers were digging into her cheeks. "I like this one," he said, completely ignoring the girl's pleas to be released. Finally, Theo interrupted. Despite the situation, he maintained a chipper smile on his face, as he proudly informed his boss that he knew he would like them. That's why he had chosen them. Theo's boss, known simply as Boss, or by his first name, Rogan, looked at Theo while still holding Charlotte's face in his hand. "It'll be your responsibility, boy, and if they get in my way..." But before he could finish, Theo waved his hands in protest and promised his boss that they wouldn't cause any trouble. He assured Rogan that he would show them everything he knew, and that he would have nothing to worry about. And with that, Rogan let go of the girl, and with a simple flick of his wrist, he dismissed the kids. Theo then led them away, showing them around and explaining the rules. Who to talk to, who to avoid, and what was to be expected of them. They were meant to be distractions, spies, or whatever the family needed. The family he referred to was the crew of thieves he worked with. They called themselves a family, and despite rarely sharing blood, they were closer than most families, sharing everything, the good and the bad, together. At first, the girls felt out of place and very different from the others. They had been raised in a home, sheltered from the world, while most of the crew, their new family, had grown up on the streets, fighting and stealing for every meal. However, as time passed and the girls got to know the new family, they began to feel at home and at ease. The work was scary and dangerous, even though they were assigned easier jobs. Sophia was used as Theo's spy. She took notes of routines, marking down the times when shopkeepers would come and go, and when they would restock, and when they would open and close. Charlotte, on the other hand, had a true knack for what they referred to as the arts. Her hands were quick, and she was brave and bold, but not foolish. She absorbed everything that everyone had to teach her, and in just a few weeks, she became one of Theo's best pickpockets, earning her the nickname Magic Hands for her ability to bring in so much coin. For a while, things ran like clockwork. Sophia would walk around the streets, begging for food and coins. But in reality, she was taking mental notes to relay back to Rogan and the crew. Meanwhile, Charlotte began to use her talents for more than just picking pockets. She started stealing keys and letters, once even snatching a key directly off a guard's belt. The thrill made it almost fun for the girls. They loved the excitement, and the fact that they never got caught, it made them feel smart. The praises they received at home made them feel special, even loved. However, they would soon face a rude awakening about just how dangerous the life they were living truly was. What started as a seemingly normal job for Theo quickly turned into something more complicated. The plan was to steal from a children's shop that promised rare artifacts and trinkets. Well, most of the items were fake. The crew was aware that some contained gold and silver. Managed to steal some of the valuable items behind the counter, it would be a huge payday. Theo hesitated to tell the other crew members about the plan, fearing that they would label it too dangerous or worry that venturing into the nicer side of town would attract too much attention. However, feeling cocky and eager to impress, he was convinced that he and the sisters could handle it. The strategy was straightforward. The three of them would wear the nicest clothes they could steal in order to blend in as if they belonged. Sophia would enter the shop and pretend to be ill, causing a scene by spitting up cold soup that she would stuff into her mouth right before entering. This distraction would give Theo the chance to rush to her side, acting as her concerned older brother, while Charlotte would sneak behind the counter to grab whatever valuables she could. It seemed like a simple plan, one that would be difficult to mess up. Little did they know that just how quickly a seemingly straightforward scheme could go awry in the wealthier part of the city, where crimes, even the smallest ones, were punished quickly and severely. On a sunny day, the three kids were excited to execute their plan. They were so sure of themselves, they were already celebrating at how proud Rogan and the rest of the family would be of them. Sophia went into the shop first, and as expected, the shopkeeper rushed over to her. She feigned being sick while Theo ran to her side, begging for help. The shopkeeper tried to usher Sophia outside, claiming they were scaring away his customers. But Sophia continued to play her role, falling to the floor, pretending that she might be sick again. Theo shouted at the shopkeeper, warning him that he had no idea who the father was, and that he had better find some help. His words were so convincing that the shopkeeper immediately ran out of the shop and waved over some guards for assistance. This development made Theo and Sophia panic as they saw the guards approaching. They weren't expecting that quick of a reaction. It wasn't like that to the lower parts of the city. Meanwhile, Charlotte was already behind the counter, her small hands grabbing anything that could fit in her deep pockets. Hearing Theo clap his hands, Charlotte knew she had to hurry. This was the signal that their time was up. Grabbing one last trinket, she darted over the counter. But her heart sank when she saw another child, Sophia's age, staring straight at her from behind a half-open door leading to the back. It was likely the shopkeeper's child. Frozen in fear, Charlotte didn't have time to plead with her not to say anything. The girl screamed for her father, pointing at Charlotte, whose pockets were bulging with stolen goods. At first, there was a brief moment of confusion from the shopkeeper and the guards. However, once they put the pieces together, the shopkeeper began cursing at the girl, demanding that she drop everything in her pockets. Charlotte was terrified, and out of pure instinct, ran around the shop to avoid the guards. When one of the guards managed to grab her, Theo acted quickly. He rammed himself into the guard and shouted at the girls to run. Charlotte took her sister's arm and fled. Another guard tried to stop them, but Theo shoved him aside. But in the process, Theo himself was caught, grabbed by the two guards. The sisters paused for a moment, looking back at their friend. They considered going to help him, but Theo, kicking and screaming, yelled at them to run and assured them he would be fine. Sophia cried, begging to go back for him, but Charlotte, being older and stronger, pulled Sophia away, insisting that there was nothing that they could do, despite her own strong desire to return for Theo. Dragging her little sister along, the girls ran through the streets, not daring to look back as they bumped into everyone in their path. They had no idea if the guards were still chasing them. Zigzagging through alleyways and crowded streets, the girls eventually reached the river and fled into the woods, seemingly losing anyone who might have been in pursuit. Scared and worried, the shaken girls raced home to the den of thieves, hoping to share what had happened and possibly help or save Theo. Upon reaching the hideouts, they ran straight to Rogan, ignoring everyone who asked where they had been. Out of breath and trembling with fear, the girls looked at Rogan, and he immediately knew something was wrong. He scanned his surroundings before asking one question: "Where's Theo?" The girls recounted what had happened to him, explaining how they had planned to rob a nice jewelry shop. They shared how Theo made them promise not to tell anyone, as it was supposed to be a surprise. Charlotte even emptied her pockets, showing Rogan that, in a way, their plan had worked. However, it all went wrong, and Theo saved them but got caught in the process. Rogan absorbed every word, and the moment the girls finished speaking, he didn't even take a breath. The man swept past the two girls with a speed they didn't know the old man had possessed. He called two of his most loyal men to accompany him, snapping them to his attention. And just like that, Rogan disappeared. He didn't berate or comfort the sisters. He simply ran to Theo's aid, knowing that every second mattered. A few hours passed before Rogan returned. The entire camp hurried to him, eager to know what had happened to their beloved Theo. But before Rogan could say a word, most of them sensed the bad news just by the way he walked into the camp. Tears in his eyes. He walked past them, and no one in the family was willing to ask. None except Sophia, who rushed past her sister and ran up to Rogan, pleading with him to tell her where Theo was. Rogan, with a long and weary expression, looked down at the little girl. He gently held her face, just as he had when he first met her. This time, however, his grasp was tender, as he looked into her eyes and said, "He's gone. Theo is gone. They took him from us." The women around cried, while the men cursed the bastard guards. Sophia fell to her knees, but Charlotte shook with anger, not at the guards, but at herself. This loss hurt somehow more than the loss of her own parents, because unlike her parents, she felt something different, something worse. She felt guilt. She blamed herself for what had happened to Theo. She should have noticed the shopkeeper's daughter, she thought. She should have been quicker. She shouldn't have been caught and made Theo save her. What made the situation even worse was that no one else seemed to blame the sisters. If anything, everyone was very compassionate, even taking the trinkets and jewelry they managed to steal and giving the girls more than their fair share in honor of Theo's final job. It wasn't until one day that a red-headed girl about Theo's age came around looking for him that anything changed. This girl was loud and annoying, demanding to know what had happened to Theo. The sisters had no idea who she was. Theo had never mentioned her, but they wanted to tell her what had happened. They felt bad for the girl, but the family wouldn't allow it, insisting it was family business. So the two sisters sat quietly, watching as the men shoved the redhead away. She refused to leave quietly, and one man backhanded her, demanding that she shut up and go away. This small act had a profound impact on Sophia. In that moment, she really realized how different the rest of the family was from Theo, how harsh and cruel they could be. That without Theo, it felt like the others were just common criminals, devoid of any heart. She knew things would be different now without him. Theo's death really changed things, especially for the two sisters. Sophia, the younger sibling, discovered that she disliked the life she felt that she had been forced to live. Well, in contrast, Charlotte became fiercely loyal, even bitter towards the guards, and resentful towards those who had more than she did. For her, family became everything, and the crew was her family. She grew up wanting nothing more than to serve Rogan and what she now considered her people. Meanwhile, Sophia longed to escape from her life, her family, Rogan, and eventually, even her sister. As the years passed, Sophia continued to do her jobs, saving every coin she could hide, and collecting trinkets and treasures, hoping to one day start a new life. In contrast, Charlotte grew to become Rogan's right-hand man, effectively replacing Theo, and even forming her own crew of misfits. This shift ultimately caused a rift between the sisters. It was no secret within their family that Sophia longed to escape, but she remained loyal, useful, and above all else, trustworthy. She could keep a secret, and despite not being as deeply involved as her sister, many trusted her more with sensitive matters. Years later, nearly a decade after the fire, the day finally came when Sophia asked Rogan for her freedom. She even offered him most of her savings. However, Rogan refused, simply wishing her luck and reminding her that her family would always be waiting for her. Though sad to see her go, he felt a sense of pride for her decision. Her family held a small celebration in honor of Sophia's departure, wishing her well, except for Charlotte, who felt angry and betrayed, interpreting her sister's choice as a rejection of everything they had built together. Despite her sister's disappointment, Sophia left and used her savings to buy her own shop, where she traded anything she could acquire. Years of experience had given her a natural talent for bargaining. Additionally, most thieves in the city would think twice about stealing from her, fearing the consequences of crossing Rogan and her family. Although she tried to leave her past behind, Sophia found herself running a shop filled with more than just legitimate goods. Her inventory included stolen items and secrets. Her business thrived, and within a few years, she had wealthy clients so influential that even the guards would turn a blind eye around her shop. But her success came at a price. Despite not living her life completely above board, Charlotte still felt that her sister had abandoned her. As months turned into years, the two of them did not speak a single word to one another. Although she missed her sister, Sophia couldn't help but feel blessed. Her shop was thriving, and she had found a man she grew fond of. Within just 3 months, they got married, and life was good and simple. Sure, she had to deal with a couple of shady figures, and the occasional guard who would strong-arm her for coins, but she never once felt that her life was in danger. Not like when she was with her family of thieves on the front lines, stealing herself. She felt important, safe, and for the first time since she was a child, she felt at home. But things would change one night when Sophia heard a knock at the door. It was a rainy night, and since it was so late, she wondered who could it be. Her husband told her to rest while he answered the door, but the knocking felt urgent. Whoever it was pounding, and the sound seemed more desperate than commanding. Sophia felt compelled to see for herself. Together, the couple rushed downstairs, only to realize that the knocking was coming from the back door. They hurried to open it, and as the door swung wide, Sophia gasped in shock. It was Charlotte. Her stomach was covered in blood. Sophia quickly asked what had happened, but all Charlotte could manage to say was one word before collapsing in front of them: help. In a panic, Sophia screamed, trying to shake her sister awake. It was her husband who finally calmed her down, insisting that she needed help immediately. Reluctantly, Sophia agreed and begged her husband to watch over her sister while she went to seek assistance. Over the years, Sophia had made many friends, some who were doctors. So despite the late hour, she rushed out into the night with a bag of coins, determined to summon a doctor who could help. She chose one she could trust, someone she had enough leverage over to ensure he would never speak of what he witnessed. The first few days felt like a never-ending nightmare. Despite the doctor being able to patch her up, Charlotte was in and out of consciousness, plagued by a fever that wouldn't break. Meanwhile, Sophia had to keep the shop running every day, while her sister fought for her life upstairs. It was a dreadful situation. However, after the fourth day, the fever finally broke, and Charlotte began to regain her strength until she was able to walk around again. It was then that Sophia asked her what had happened. At first, Charlotte didn't want to explain. She was still angry with her sister. Even though Sophia had just saved her life, Charlotte felt abandoned and betrayed. But eventually, she relented and told Sophia everything. The story that unfolded was beyond belief. Not because Sophia didn't trust her sister, but because it sounded so crazy. Over the years, the sisters had not spoken, and Charlotte had dug into their past, uncovering details about the parents. She discovered that their father had taken out enormous loans from a single group of men who were anything but good. These men would extort and take everything until you had nothing left. And when you could give no more, like the father in the end, they would get rid of you. Sophia was in shock. She had always thought the fire that had destroyed their childhood home was an accident or a tragic mistake. She had idolized their father, seeing him as a saint. Now, however, her sister was telling her that in a way, he was responsible for the fire because he had borrowed money from these dangerous men. Charlotte viewed the father differently though, believing that he was a victim of greed, with the blame lying squarely on the men who lent the money to him and ultimately started the fire. Despite this revelation, Sophia was confused about how it related to Charlotte's current situation. So Charlotte explained that after learning some of these men were still around, she had planned a job to steal from the men who had torched their home. Unfortunately, the plan went awry, and they were caught. Things escalated quickly, and the men turned out to be far more connected and powerful than she had realized. Charlotte's voice trembled as she broke the terrible news. Everyone was gone, even Rogan. The men had traced her back to their hideout and slaughtered everyone. Charlotte had barely escaped and felt responsible for everything that had gone wrong. The news hit Sophia like a stab in the gut. Rogan, her family, everyone was gone. How could this be true? For a moment, she felt an overwhelming urge to slap her sister, to tell her that she was lying. But when she looked into Charlotte's eyes, the fear, the sorrow, the anger, she understood that her sister was telling the truth. Just like that, she was an orphan once more. With that kind of heat, Sophia's husband told Charlotte that she had to go. He feared she would bring whatever trouble she was in to their doorstep. Charlotte agreed, but Sophia refused to abandon her sister again. She insisted that if Rogan was gone, she was the only one left that could protect Charlotte. Despite his reservations, Sophia's husband couldn't force her to forsake her sister, so he reluctantly agreed, and the two kept Charlotte's secret, hidden in their attic, hoping to keep her safe. At first, the three of them were paranoid, anxiously waiting for someone to come to the door looking for Charlotte. However, as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, Sophia, her husband, and eventually Charlotte began to relax. Sophia even found a bit of joy in the situation. Well, she wasn't happy on how it happened. She was glad to have her sister back in her life. Everything seemed to be going well now, with Charlotte even leaving the shop a few times and returning without incident. They assumed by this point that the men who attacked the den must have believed they had fatally wounded Charlotte and thought there was no reason to search for her. Though Sophia had lost the protection of Rogan, she had gained enough favor with other people to manage without him. This didn't ease the pain of his absence, but it did help her feel less loss. On the surface, life seemed to have returned to normal with her sister back, but in the shadows, Sophia was unaware of Charlotte's inner turmoil. Charlotte could not let go of the past. Both of her families had been taken from her, and all she could think about was revenge. For months, she plotted carefully, watching the group of men who destroyed her life. She observed the patterns and dealings, patiently waiting for the right moment to strike, obsessed with revenge for her two families. Despite all her planning and patience, Charlotte found herself caught trying to set fire to one of the warehouses. To make matters worse, she was recognized by some of the men who had seen her lurking. Some even knew where she lived, at her sister's shop. Charlotte begged for mercy, pleading to them to kill her instead, and promising that her sister had nothing to do with her actions. But the men showed no mercy. They beat and tortured Charlotte throughout the night, before bringing her to the doorstep of her sister's shop the next morning. The group of men scared away everyone nearby, ensuring that there would be no witnesses, before calling out for Sophia and her husband to come outside. Sophia was confused by the shouts until she looked out the window. There she saw her sister, gagged and beaten, her face covered in blood. In a panic, Sophia rushed downstairs, begging them to let Charlotte go and offering them anything they wanted, every treasure and secret she possessed. The men only laughed, telling her they were there for her to say goodbye. And just like that, one of the men slashed Charlotte's throat. Sophia screamed in horror and desperation, running to her sister in an attempt to save her. But it was too late. She held Charlotte, pleading for her to hold on, knowing deep down it was futile. Wounded and tortured, Charlotte faded away almost immediately, her final thoughts consumed by guilt. She had killed everyone, from Theo to Rogan and now her sister. Charlotte died with nothing but regret in her heart. In shock, Sophia lost control, screaming as she attacked one of the men. He merely chuckled and snapped the younger sister back down. Sophia fell next to her sister's lifeless body, filled with nothing but anger. Fueled by rage, she launched herself at the man again, scratching his face and punching his ear. This time, her aggression infuriated the man. No longer amused, he grabbed Sophia and punched her hard across the face, as hard as he could, breaking her nose and costing her a couple of teeth. Seeing this, Sophia's husband grabbed a small knife from his pocket and rushed to her aid. However, before he could reach her, 3 men subdued him with a blow to the back of his head, dazing him and forcing him to his knees. Meanwhile, through her blurry vision, Sophia tried to fight back, swinging at the man despite her injuries. He taunted her, saying she had good friends who prevented him from killing her, but she should have kept a better leash on her sister. His words burned like fire, reminiscent of the flames of her childhood. Anger swelled in her heart, and she spat in his face, cursing him and declaring she would have his head. As Sophia quickly realized her mistake, she began to plead, Wait, I'm sorry!" But the man had fixed his eyes on her husband. As he cleaned his face, he walked towards her husband, who was still dazed. "Your friend said I couldn't kill you. You never said your husband was anyone important." Sophia watched in horror as the man grabbed her husband by the hair, lifting his head. With the same blade he had used to kill Charlotte moments earlier, he placed it upon her husband's neck with a haunting grin across his face. "No, please!" Sophia screamed, crawling toward them, bloodied and defeated. She begged him to take anything he wanted, shouting at the top of her lungs that she was sorry. But the man ignored her pleas as he loomed over her husband. But after a moment of contemplation, he smiled and simply spat on her husband's face before throwing him to the ground. "Remember, you still have more to lose in this world, bitch," he said to her, before departing with his men, satisfied that he had put her in her place, and satisfied with the vengeance for the disrespect and stupidity Charlotte had shown by trying to burn down their warehouse. As the men began to disappear off into the distance, Sophia curled protectively around her husband's head, kissing him and whispering that he would be okay, all the while staring at her sister's corpse. Her heart burned with anger, and her mind raced with plans for vengeance. She would not let her sister's death go unanswered. Tears may have streamed down her face, but all she could see was fire in her future. Thank you for watching. So, what do you think? Was Charlotte too careless in the end? Was their father to blame? Or was he too a victim like Charlotte thought? Want to hear more of where Sophia's story will take her? Will there be more fire in her future? Let me know in the comments below what you think, and don't forget to hit that like and subscribe so you don't miss a single story from the world of Sharoon. I will see you in the next one.